Hello everyone, welcome to Switchcraft, the Fingerboard podcast, episode number 7.
Good day everyone, it's your co-host, Julian Buono.
And as always, me, Jana Kemmer. And today we want to talk about a bit of opinion pieces, as we like to call it. And we're gonna be talking about preferences and what we like and try to help you
navigate through the fingerboard scene and the various parts and whatnot.
and figuring out what you like or what to pay attention to and all of those good things. So, back in my day, trucks sucked.
Yeah, that's a statement that everyone can apply to, I think. Starting in the 2000 era, like early 2000s, basically all you had was
tech deck. Yeah, we had a 26mm tech deck, and the whole wideness thing is something that's pretty much only attributed to the width of the trucks, because back then tech deck trucks or tech deck fingerboards used to be 26mm. And that is why you had pretty much only 26mm Berlin wood and other wooden fingerboards when they first got launched. And over the years, when we got other trucks, it slowly started creeping up to wider trucks and wider boards and became a bit more of a separate thing. But back then it was, you pretty much didn't have an option.
Yeah, but even with tech deck trucks, fingerboarders did some DIY changes to them.
Yeah, you had to.
Yeah, absolutely, because they were totally shit to begin with. So you had single axle pins with really short, shitty threads. So you had to basically, if you had bearing wheels, you had to basically rip them out and get your wheels on bearing screws that were usually provided with bearing wheels, so that you could basically just change a set of trucks so that you could fit bearing wheels, or else you would lose a nut in a matter of seconds.
I think I talked about that, how fingerboarding was back in the day and how wheels were back in the day.
Yeah.
Because my first set, Martin Winkler screwed them in for me. He always had his case with him and pliers and ripped out the pins and got his own, put a bit glue on and then basically screwed them into your axle. So the wheels were screwed on.
Yeah, and you couldn't change it, but you didn't need to, basically.
Yeah, but you didn't need to. But the only other option was when you didn't have good wheels. What we did was just put glue on the nut, because there were no lock nuts. And during a run at a big event, it was totally common that someone
would just lose a wheel.
Yeah, or a whole hanger fell off.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people always had two setups with them when doing runs. In case. I always had a backup setup with me.
That's good.
And yeah, we're now at a point where it's much better with trucks.
Oh yeah, because Black River took up the game and designed the first actually fully functional professional fingerboard truck, made out of 16 parts, I believe. But not that's relevant. More the basic concept was that they were designed specifically for bearing wheels and specifically for Winkler wheels, because you basically had no point of friction between the wheel and the truck. The only thing that was touching was the core of the bearing and the nut. So the wheel was totally tight, was not wobbling around anymore, like a skateboard basically.
Yeah.
But that brought another problem to the rise. You were losing wheels even faster, because since the nuts were so closely fitting the bearing, they unscrewed themselves on a daily basis, or more or less on a minute basis. So
because what would happen was that the wheel would basically grab the nut and then unscrew the nut whilst rolling.
Exactly. And so Black River Trucks 2.0 came quickly to replace the 29mm. Oh yeah, 29mm trucks meant 29mm Berlin woods. the first Berlinwoods that were made in Schwarzenbach were 29 millimeters according to the trucks. So Black River Trucks 2.0 had a stabler basis. It was a bit wider and a bit more sturdy, so that the base would no longer strip. And lock nuts, the first ever lock nuts in the Fingerboard game, that were just with a little ring. Yeah, you all know lock nuts. I mean, it's common knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I came back to fingerboarding, lock nuts blew me away. Because, like I said, it used to be just part of the game that you lose a nut. Like, that would just happen when you session at home or when you're at an event. And lock nuts made that pretty rare today, and I'm quite happy that it's that way.
Totally. That's a change in the game.
Yeah, and then over the years, people were requesting wider boards.
Yeah, well, the pros started riding wider boards. You had all the pros riding 32, so basically we wanted as well. And so 32mm Berlinwoods, and shortly after
32mm trucks. That basically set the stage for quite a long time.
Yeah. 32 was the standard for about 3 years, I would say. In the peak time, everybody was riding 32, I'd say.
And still, like, I tend to ride wider boards. I mostly ride 32mm trucks. Like, I have, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 sets of 32mm trucks.
Holy fuck knuckles.
Dynamics and BRTs and stuff. Why? And only have 2 sets of 34s. Depending on the wheel and depending on the exact widthness of your deck, you can make up the difference between a 32mm truck and a 34mm deck, but it's probably still gonna be a bit of a difference between the edge of your wheel and your deck.
Yeah.
That also isn't just an optical thing, it also really changes how your board rotates.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
The width in general, like a 26mm board flips completely different than a 34mm board.
Yeah, but I'd say like that's true of every width change.
Yeah.
Like you could say basically that the tendency is the wider boards tend to rotate slower and are more controlled in the shove-its.
Yeah.
Or basically even the flips, since they rotate slower, you can catch them more accurately and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you have to basically figure out your preferences and see what fits your hands better.
Yeah.
Because for me, for example, it's totally at 32.5, but not wider than that, because it gets tedious for me. It just flips too slow for my style, and basically it's too heavy even, you know?
Yeah, I like riding 34.5 like once in a while. I always have a setup with me that is wide, but my go-to setups, like my main setups, are always 33.3 and usually have 32mm trucks on them.
But anyway, the decks changing and this trend to make boards that were wider than 32 brought a problem, because Black River didn't come up with wider trucks till recently, so the game had to step itself up, and basically 2 other truck companies that we haven't mentioned earlier came into place on a bigger scale. White Trucks from Portugal, Dynamic from Southern California.
And all of those companies have their positives and their negatives. Like, depending what you like and what you don't like, or what you ride, there are specific things about the trucks that change the behavior of your board. And we want to talk about those details and what they mean exactly, because I see that question pretty much everywhere all the time. I want to buy my first real fingerboard, my first pro board, or whatever you want to call it. Which trucks should I get? For me, the answer I always give isn't the answer I know that other people would give, but what I always say is, if you're from the States, get Dynamics. If you're from Europe, get BOT. The simple thing about that is, when you're new to the game and you don't have had a lot of opportunities to ride like pro trucks and know what they are, how they behave, it pretty much doesn't matter with what you start. You will figure out what you like a bit later. The matter of fact is, like, here in Europe, BOTs are way more affordable, and in the States, Dynamics are way more affordable due to shipping and taxes and all of that. But other than that, there are a lot of differences about the trucks.
Yeah, because while that's true, you also have to say that those three companies, White Trucks, Black River, and Dynamics, have differences in the build, structural differences,
yes,
that are really important. Like, for example, Black River is the mid truck in pretty much everything, and White Trucks and Dynamics are the both extremes. Like, for example, White Trucks are really high for a truck, so you tend to have a higher setup.
And what that means is, if your setup's higher, a lot of people always talk about, oh, I like high kicks, I like low kicks, but the angle of the kick usually sets the angle in which you pop.
Exactly.
But if you have higher or lower trucks, that's another variable that gets into the whole thing. Same with if you ride a white truck with Joy-Cult XLs.
Yeah, and it's even higher, monster truck.
Yeah. And some people prefer a very high kick with that, which basically leads to a style that pops very high. And other people like very low to the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're one of them.
For example, prefer Dynamics to BRTs and White Trucks, although I've used Black River for most of my fingerboarding career. I've used Black River trucks for 8 years, but then I switched to Dynamics and found them lighter and lower, and that fits my style better. But still, you have to say the only truck that is really usable out of the box is a Black River truck. You don't have to tweak anything about that.
That is a big thing for me. Like, of course there are preferences when it comes to bushings, but even with the stock bushings, you can just screw it on your board and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And I don't really like tuning my setup that much. I know you're one that will find every little detail to perfect.
Yeah, the thing is, since I like the things that Dynamic Trucks brings to the table more than Black River Trucks, I have to tweak the things I don't like about them. For example, they tend to get stuck laterally because the hole of the hanger in which the kingpin sits is a bit too big, and the ridge that should contain the bushing is a bit too low. So that leads to this
like sideways.
Yeah. It moves sideways, and then it gets stuck that way, and then your setup starts to turn to fuck all. So that's a problem, and I just fixed that.
Yeah, like the way they are constructed is completely different. Like, the obvious thing is BRTs are pretty much oriented on a regular skate truck, and even though there are kingpin screws on real-life skateboards, a screwable kingpin is very much out of the ordinary. And I mean...
Inverted kingpins aren't regular.
Yeah. And
sure.
I mean, in other areas, BRTs is not the most accurate skateboard.
Exactly. For example, the hanger.
Yeah, but the way the kingpin is constructed... It's pretty much the only one of those three that is oriented on a real-life skateboard.
Yeah.
Whether you like that or not is up to you, but that's the biggest visual difference. And with BRTs, like Julian said, you can just put them on. With Dynamics, we at the Berlin shop pretty much now found a way how we like it. Like, we all brainstormed and someone found another little thing to do.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
We pretty much know what we're doing. But
so basically, we try to emulate the turning style, like the turning control of the Black River truck on a dynamic truck, because that's not the same.
Because the pivot cup, since it's a different construction, the pivot moves like in the pivot cup, basically. And in a BRT, it's pretty much set in there. And of course, it sometimes jumps out, but with dynamics, we found to use like the shrink wrap tubes and use them as
To be quite honest, I have been using the original dynamic stock pivot cups in my last setup, and I like them. You just have to break them in. That's another thing. A setup reaches an optimum, like where everything is perfect. The bearings are turning at the right speed. The tape is worn in, and the trucks are broken in, you know? And if you put everything together, start tuning so much, then it reaches that optimum faster, but it feels worn out faster. So if you just take, for example, Black River trucks with the stock bushings and just slap them on, you're gonna have a hard time literally at the start, but still once they are worn in, it's a totally different thing. It stays at that optimum longer.
And I don't really recognize that worn in period. Like for me, I used plenty of BRTs out of the box and pretty much rode them that way and didn't really have any issues with them not being broken in, because for me they're always just fine. And with dynamics, like for example, we started doing the lock nut on the wheel the other way, but this only works with a BRT lock nut on a dynamic hanger.
Yeah, don't try that with a dynamic knot. You're never gonna get it off again.
Yeah. And I personally don't like the kingpin screw, since it's a pain in the ass to put bushings in there. And also I know that
it seems like we're totally blackballing the truck. Oh my god. Scott, we're sorry. It's not meant like that.
He's a big fan, and like I said, I still own 2 sets of dynamics and I like riding them, but
it's not your go-to.
Yeah, and it took a while for them to be how I like them. And also, I'm someone who changes trucks to other boards a lot of time. Yeah. And a lot of people complain about Black River trucks wearing out, like the
stripping the base plate.
Yes, the base plate stripping on the screw. For me, I never had that issue, and I've had my oldest base plate on way more setup than someone who just mounts them off to change the tape. And I never had a problem, because if you're careful and do it in like increments, you're fine with not stripping your base plates. Yeah. And with dynamics, I found that the kingpin, putting a bit of glue on them, like you showed me, is something that's quite important. And if you keep changing the trucks to another board, you're basically starting off from scratch. The same thing with changing bushings. Like I always color coordinate my setups. And when I change the bushings, it's like setting up a new pair of dynamic trucks.
Yeah, okay. I see what you mean.
So it's like we said, it's all about preference, and dynamic are an amazing truck. Like I said, but it's a truck that you have to work for.
It's not pick up and play, basically.
Yeah, and let's talk about white trucks for a bit. I know you're not really a big fan of white trucks.
No, I'm not.
I own a set of them, and they are X4s, I think, so a bit older. Right. I know that the X5s are much lighter. They are about as light as dynamics, but I would need to measure them or put them on the scale to be exactly sure. I rode them on Uncle Urban's setup, for example, and they're still too tall for me. And for me, there's a weird feeling, like they always feel
weird turning control.
Yeah, and also I don't know how to describe it. Like the axle feels more rigid, like it's weird to explain, but for me, just doing an ollie with a white truck, I always immediately recognize that it's a white truck.
Sure.
And just the sound, like a lot of people are probably thinking, why aren't you talking about tech deck trucks? You can tune them quite well. For me, it's the same thing. a tech deck truck will always sound like a tech deck truck, even if it's tuned. There are ways to tune them, but for me, they will never quite feel like a
professional Fingerboard
truck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. That's another thing. If you get in your first setup, be aware of the fact if you're getting tuned tech deck trucks, you can do that, but they are never gonna be as durable as a Black River truck or a dynamic truck. I can't speak for white trucks because I haven't tested them for myself on longer periods of time, so yeah. But a Black River truck, I have a set of Black River trucks that's 5 years old and it's still going strong. I mean, that's quite a feat, you know? So basically, if you buy cheap, you buy twice.
Yeah, and if you buy cheap trucks, you can't really judge the setup too much. I mean, I know there are people who like tuned tech deck trucks or tech deck trucks in general, like False Prophet is someone who likes them the way they are.
But he prefers high setups.
Yeah, and for me, every time I use a setup of mine where I just put tech deck trucks on there because I want to ride them and I don't have infinite BRTs, I never pick up that setup. Like, I just never use it.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
And also, when I want to test wheels on those kind of setups, you can't really say anything about wheels when the trucks feel weird to you. They can feel perfect for other people, and they will be able to judge the deck and the wheels. But the way I like it, I have to put a deck and wheels on BRTs or dynamics to see if the deck is to my liking or if the wheels are what I want.
I totally get that for sure, because you don't get that perfect turning and that zero friction against the truck.
Yeah.
With, even if they're really well tuned, it's not the same construction. You just can't tell me that. Come on, mate.
Yeah, and also, speaking of construction, white trucks are usually double bearing wheels. To mount single bearing wheels on them, you pretty much have to put washers or some kind of spaces on there. But on the other hand, if you prefer double bearing wheels, you can't really put them on BRTs. I'm quite sure that dynamic.
Oh yeah, you could DM Scott Scott Beastbower from Dynamic Trucks on Instagram for a longer axle pin, because he has a bit more of variation range possibility.
But with BRTs you just have to use single bearing wheels.
Yeah.
The whole single bearing, double bearing wheel tends to be a discussion about, I like it more realistic and stuff. And I always am part of the camp. I don't really care about realism too much in fingerboarding. And also, I like when the trucks look kinda realistic, like with the Kingpin.
Yeah.
But if the hanger is a bit more straight, like a BRT, I don't mind it too much. I can appreciate that the dynamic hanger is much more accurate, but that's not really something I pay attention to or I
get what you mean. You certainly can't go for realism in a double bearing wheel, but then have trucks that are too high. I mean, that's a contradiction,
same thing with the width of the board. A 29mm is probably the closest thing you get to a scaled down skateboard.
Yeah.
And as soon as you put either kingpin screws or 32mm board or even 33mm board or 34mm board on there, it just changes the whole proportions of the setup, and it doesn't look like a realistic miniature representation of a skateboard anymore.
Sure, but not only like the proportions, also like the weight distribution is greatly affected. Like if you have, for example, a really heavy board, where trucks that are really light and really small light wheels, it will just flip weird because the weight distribution is totally off. It's just inertia doesn't work that way.
Yeah, because in that kind of example, the weight would be at the top of the deck, so in a kickflip rotation, it's at the center of the axis and not at the outside where it actually helps the rotation.
So you even inhibit the flip.
Yeah.
Kind of.
But like we said a million times, it's all about preference, and we're mostly here trying to
just
dissect,
navigate.
Yeah, and
dissect and navigate. That's good.
So that you know what to pay attention to, and helps you figure out what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
Speaking of the whole realism thing, let's talk about realism in fingerboarding in a more broader aspect.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are very much into like as low kickflips as possible, filmed like from the ground, where basically the lens touches the nose.
Hi, that's me.
And yeah, only do tricks you would see in a skate video.
Yeah.
And,
okay. Well.
Yeah, or you could see in a skate video. And for me, I didn't really give a fuck about that. Like, I'm from a time where realism, like, fuck realism. For me, fingerboarding is most importantly about having fun. And since for me nothing of the deck is the accurate representation of skateboarding, because all of the proportions and stuff, and also the stuff you can do with your wrist rather than a rotation in your body. For me, it's just a whole separate thing, and because of that, I never aim to do tricks very realistically.
Mm-hmm.
And
I get that.
That's also a reason why I do those flat ground things. Not all of them are accurate representation of flat ground tricks, because a lot of them don't work. As soon as you have to put your hands on the board, it's quite tough to do that with a fingerboard. I mean freestyle, sorry. And as soon as you have to try to do finger flips, cartwheels and stuff like that. Shout out to cartwheels.
Sneak.
As soon as you try to do those kind of things, you pretty much find the border of what goes on a fingerboard and what you can't do.
Yeah, and for me, on the other hand, it's that's one of the biggest kinks in fingerboarding, because for me it totally comes from appreciating the aesthetics of skateboarding and not being fucking able to do it. So I basically just aim to emulate that aesthetic, you know. So for me, if the flip is one board width above the curb, I have to redo the clip. But that's fine. I mean, and that's one of the beauties of fingerboarding. You can find 20 different people with 20 different styles that will regard another aspect as something beautiful in fingerboarding. It's all about basically.
And also those different approaches, I think, lead to different kind of tricks we do. And not to say that all the tricks I do are unrealistic. Like, my favorite trick is a 360 pop shove it and a hard flip. And those tricks are very much doable. But it's much harder to do like a hard flip into a grind just because of the height on a real skateboard. And on a fingerboard it's way easier because gravity works a bit in our favor compared to a skateboard. I know that you do a lot of like very technical tricks that very much are low to the ground and flip right into a rail or...
But still, I mean, there are skateboarders that do hard flips into grinds.
I know, so, but you don't see those kind of tricks on a regular basis. Like, if you watch Street League, you aren't gonna see a hard flip blunt on a ledge by every rider. You will maybe see it once one rider perform, but like a kickflip no slide or stuff like that are much more being done.
Yeah,
and
I get what you mean.
That is what I mean. It's possible to do those tricks, and me doing those tricks isn't like unrealistic, but I reached that point because I wasn't aiming to emulate a specific clip and a specific rider and a specific trick repertoire. I pretty much just found out that I really like hard flips and I really like 360 pop shove-its, and that's how I ended up there. I'm not trying to emulate a rider who has like perfect 360 pop shove-its.
I get what you mean, but me doing switch trays is not me trying to emulate Shane O'Neill. I mean,
are you sure about that?
Yeah, totally sure, because I could basically just hang up my fingerboard on a wall and just be done with it, because that's not emulatable or whatever you call that. I don't know, it's just a really fun trick to me. But the way I try to do it into a combo still tries to reflect the skateboard approach. So what you say is true.
Yeah, and that's, for me, that also leads to how I watch clips. and what I look forward to in a clip. Like when I see the millionth kickflip nose grind at a centimeter above the rail and filmed from the nose, I'm like, yeah, I kind of seen that before, and for me the realism isn't really a selling point. So for me it's just another kickflip, even though it's probably much more difficult to do a very low precise kickflip, and it's quite difficult to figure out the self-filming style where you're quite close to the board, but for me, those things don't really appeal too much.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Sure.
And yeah, when I watch tricks, I really like people doing weird shit. Like, I enjoy Fingered Ben, shout out to Ben, doing like the weirdest tricks you're never gonna see a skateboarder do, because most of them are things a skateboarder can't do or lean themselves much towards that style on a fingerboard. And when he does, like in his latest edit, he has tricks where he catches the board with his chin. It looks awkward, but for me, I understand that not a lot of people like that, but I'm like, that's exactly what I like with thinking out of the box and treating it more as its own rather than a miniaturization of a skateboard.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a miniaturization of a skateboard. It's still completely its own thing, but still that's what I can appreciate the most about the clip. When it's really, I don't know, I don't even know how to explain. If I don't know, I'm still more stoked about perfect pop out of a grind than a perfect flip-in, because to me it's that you just see that and you get the feeling of that pop out. Oh fuck, that must have felt like that. I don't know, it's just different tweaks.
Yeah, but like it all comes back to basically the theme of this episode.
Yeah.
It's all about what you like and figuring out what you like, and just because you like something doesn't mean you have to hate the other thing. Like,
absolutely.
I would never go to one of Julian's or Nico Frank clips or whoever does that style quite well and be like, oh, that sucks, why you don't just try to ride a skateboard, then you get a real feel of and a real look of a skateboard.
Get a life!
Basically like that. Like, just because it's something that I don't look forward to in tricks doesn't mean that it's rubbish or anything like that. So if you just don't hate on tricks or people or styles, and
don't believe the hype.
And don't believe the hype. Yeah, I think that this is like as good of a place to end the episode.
Yeah, this seems like a wrap.
And as far as news are concerned, we haven't really found that much. Yeah, basically nothing new in the world of fingerboarding. A few stock drops here and there. DK wheels, but they sold out in 10 minutes.
What are you doing here?
Yeah, so stocks like that happen all the time, but nothing really noteworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, stay tuned for the Mike Schneider interview.
Oh.
We're gonna do that in not that long, hopefully.
Yeah. Some day in the near future.
Yeah, as always, you can find us at switchcraft-podcast.com. We're slowly trying or letting the SoundCloud account die, because you have to pay and stuff like that, and I much rather have my own website.
Yeah, just go on there.
Yeah, and if you have any topics you would like to discuss us in the future,
oh yeah, totally,
shoot us a message. Yeah,
tell us.
You will hear us in the future.
Yeah, you will.
Bye.
Tschüss.